Hello everyone, in this week's video I'm going to unbox this Paletteful Pack box and create an illustration of the supplies inside. So let's get started! The first thing I grab out are these Strathmore watercolor postcards. These are so cute. They are watercolor paper with the postcard stuff on the back so you can make your own postcards. Next up is the Koi Watercolor Pocket Field Sketch Box Set. I was so excited when I figured out the theme for this box was watercolor paints. I wanted to get back into watercolors, so this box was perfect for me. So this is a tiny watercolor palette with 12 colors. It even comes with a tiny water brush and sponge. It is so cute. Now we have the Strathmore Watercolor Visual Journal. It has 44 pages and it has 140-pound paper, so it is pretty thick paper. I'm really excited about this watercolor sketchbook. I've never really had a watercolor sketchbook before. It's also kind of fancy because you can take the front piece of paper off and then it has this fancy hardcover. Next is the Niji Pearlescent Watercolor Set. Pearlescent watercolors are kind of shiny and have glitter in them. I've wanted to try pearlescent watercolors for a while now, so I was really excited when I saw these. And lastly, we have this Derwent Watercolor Pencil in Persian Blue. So after taking out all of the supplies, I swatched the paints onto the watercolor paper. Now I'm not a watercolor expert, like fancy watercolors act like this and they should do this and that's what makes them so fancy. But the Koi watercolors seem really nice. The colors are really bright and you get a really good assortment of colors. However, I do kind of wish they gave you like a nice bright purple. I know you can make purple with red and blue, but it's kind of hard to get like a super bright purple, so I kind of wish they would have given a purple. As for the pearlescent paints, I was a little underwhelmed. I don't know, they aren't super colorful and are pretty muted. I have to really soak the brush in the paint to get the color to go onto the paper. When I see other artists use paints like these, they seem to be more colorful and more sparkly, so I don't know if this is the best brand for pearlescent paint. But they do have a nice little shimmer to them, and the muted colors really inspired me. So now I'll start working on the illustration. So when I saw the muted colors of the pearlescent paints, it really inspired me to make some fan art for a game I've been playing recently called Chil of Light. I guess Chil of Light is a couple years old now or something like that, but it just recently came to Nintendo Switch, and I've been playing it on there and it was on sale, so I bought it. And I've really been enjoying the game. It's a really fun turn-based RPG kind of game. One of the best parts about the game is the visuals. They are so pretty and they are done in kind of this almost illustrative like storybook kind of style and kind of look like they're painted with watercolor. And this scene I'm drawing right here is actually inspired by an actual scene in the game. Maybe I'll put the screenshot I took when I was playing the game and I came across this area. I'm like, oh my word, I might want to draw this later, so I'll take a screenshot. And I'm really glad I did because I actually did end up using the screenshot. And so I'm drawing the main character, Aurora, and she's kind of standing on this rock cliff formation. And she has this really big sword in the game that's kind of too big for her, and it's like really heavy and she has like a hard time wielding it. It might actually be a bit bigger than what I drew it as, but I don't know, I feel like the sword looks okay. And she also wears this super big crown on her head, and her design overall is just kind of cute and really cool. And she also has really vibrant colors in her design, but everything else is kind of muted, like the background. In the background there's going to be some pine trees, and there's going to be ones that are really close to her, and there's also going to be some kind of in the background in the fog, and I'm also going to be drawing clouds and stuff. Right now I'm cleaning up my rough sketch and I'm trying to get all of the details in place. Right now I'm sketching out the trees. I was really trying to get the look of the trees like they are in the game because they have this really whimsical quality to them. And for this picture I really wanted to try to go with kind of the illustrative storybook kind of style. So I kept Aurora really simple. She's actually a little bit more detailed in the game, but I just kind of wanted to make her really simple. The trees took me a really long time. I wanted them to get lighter as we moved to the bottom because of the fog. And for the background trees, I just copy and pasted the two trees I used before, but I like flipped them and slightly changed the details so they wouldn't look exactly the same. Also, I decided to sketch digitally in Clip Studio Paint. I just really like the freedom that sketching digitally gives me because I don't feel pressured to like make things perfect, and I can just resize things and move things around, and it's just a lot easier for me to sketch digitally. So after I finished my digital sketch, I printed it out onto some printer paper and then used my light pad to transfer it to my watercolor paper. The watercolor paper is pretty thick, so I was actually having kind of a hard time seeing my sketch through the paper, and it was kind of fuzzy, but I was trying to get the details into place. I was really nervous while inking Aurora because she's actually pretty tiny, and like her face is so tiny, and I always get really nervous when inking tiny things. And I really only inked Aurora and the rocks in the foreground. For the trees, I didn't do line art because I knew I wanted those to be kind of more rough and not so controlled. And so I just did a light pencil outline of the trees. I used a black pencil for the foreground trees, and then I used a light brown pencil for the background trees because I knew I was going to be using kind of a lightish brownish black paint for the background trees. So after finishing the line art, I decided to tape down my sketch and start coloring with the watercolors. So I start off by adding a light wash of water and some light orange paint to the sky to give it a slight tint of color. And I try to work that light orange color down into the trees. And then I mix up a darker orange for the orange cloud, and I just add a whole bunch of splotches of color. I used a bunch of different oranges and reds, and I think maybe a little bit of purple. I don't totally remember. I was just mixing a whole bunch of colors and splotching them onto the page while the water was still wet. That way I would get this nice splotchiness effect for the clouds. And then I mixed up a kind of muted blue color, and then I used I think magenta and a little bit of red in that cloud. And I was just trying to keep things kind of splotchy and loose and just kind of trying to let the watercolors do what they wanted. I wasn't too worried about controlling the clouds. And then next up, I am mixing up my brownish color for the rocks. While I was waiting for the clouds to dry, I decided to work on the rocks. And the rocks were really fun because I could kind of just let the paint do whatever it wanted, because I wanted the rocks to be kind of rough and not super smooth and kind of have texture to them. And watercolor can be really nice for giving things uneven texture. And so I just kind of splotched my brush around a whole bunch and just kind of let the watercolor do its thing. I think the rocks might have been one of my favorite things to color. So next I take a super tiny brush and some lightish brown paint, and I start working on the trees in the background. I use a light brown for the background trees because I want them to look like they're kind of far away from us and that they're not super close to us. And then I'll use a black for the foreground trees. I try to make the brown get lighter and lighter as I move down. That way the tree looks like it's covered in fog, and the fog is getting thicker as we move to the ground. I really like the fog effects in the game and how it makes things look like it has depth. And so I really wanted to try to capture that in this picture. When coloring the brown trees, I also kind of tried to go a little bit into the sketch of the black trees because I wasn't totally sure where I was going to color for the black trees, and I wanted the brown to kind of take up the whole bottom area. That way it kind of fills in the background area a little bit and it makes it feel less empty and like there's trees back in there. And so I tried to color a little bit of the foreground trees in with the brown paint. That way I wouldn't have random white splotches in the background. So as I was waiting for the light brown paint to dry, I decided to paint the tiny little details by the rocks. And once I was done with that, I go in with the black paint, and I was so nervous for this part because I'm going in with just really pigmented black paint. I hardly used any water because I wanted the paint to be super thick. That way I could get kind of thin lines and it wouldn't like go everywhere. And as I kept moving down, I kept adding a little bit more water to my brush, that way it would get lighter. And once I get to about this point, I just kept pulling the pigment from the upper part of the tree down. And I also had some super light gray paint on the side that I mixed up, and that's what I used for the bottom part of the tree. I was trying to work really slowly and carefully while working on these trees because I really wanted them to turn out really nicely. And I am quite happy with how they turned out. I feel like they turned out looking pretty cool and kind of like the fog is going over them at the bottom. So this tree was even harder than the first black tree because Aurora's hair is kind of blowing in front of the tree, and so I had to be super careful with the black paint because I didn't want it to get into Aurora's hair, and Aurora's hair is like a bright pink. So I want to try to keep Aurora as clean as I could because her colors are super duper bright, and yeah, I didn't want to get her dirty with the black paint. Also, I'm super happy I had the really tiny brush. If I hadn't had this super tiny brush, a lot of this picture wouldn't have been possible. So as I was waiting for the black paint to dry, I decided to add some more depth to the rocks down below. So I added some dark brown paint, and then I would use the sponge in the little kit that they gave me, and I would add the texture to the rocks by dabbing the brush all over. The sponge is actually really cool because it doesn't really soak up the paint, it just kind of like textures the paint. I don't know, I really like the little sponge they gave, it's really cool. I would also add some brown paint and then blend it out with a dry brush. This kind of lets the paint have a bit of texture, but I can also kind of blend it out a little bit so that it gets lighter as I go up. But I had a lot of fun working on the rocks and getting to kind of blend out the paint. And now I'm finally starting to work on Aurora. So Aurora has this super bright yellow dress, and so I was trying to mix a nice yellow for her dress. It kind of starts out lighter at the top and gets darker towards the bottom. So I was trying to create this gradient. I feel like I kind of lost it a little bit towards the end because I kept adding a lot of yellow. But I feel like it turned out nicely. Like I mentioned earlier, Aurora's colors are super bright, so this brightly colored paint worked really nice for her. Next I start coloring her hair. She has this super bright pink hair, and I don't feel like I could get the pink to be quite bright enough. Like, this color did work really nicely and it's really close to her hair color, but I just couldn't quite get it to be like the super bright pink that she has. It did end up being a little bit more pastel-y and slightly more muted, but I still feel like her hair turned out nicely. I wanted to keep it really flowy looking. Like, her hair is always flowing in the game and it's super pretty and whimsical. And so I wanted her hair to stay really whimsical looking, so I didn't put a ton of detail into it. Oh, also I used a little bit of pearlescent paint on her wings and on the sword so they'd look kind of shiny. I also ended up putting a little bit of yellow pearlescent paint on her crown and on her dress so it would be a little bit shiny. It actually looks really cool because when I tilt it in the light, they kind of shine a little bit. And for her skin tone, I didn't quite get her skin tone right. I think I made it a little bit too orangey. She has more of a yellow skin tone, but I do like the skin tone that I used, even though it's not quite close enough to her skin tone. While working on this picture, I really remembered why I love watercolors so much. It has been so long since I've worked with them. I haven't worked with them for probably about like a year or two. But I had so much fun getting to work with them again, and one thing I always really love about watercolors, you're just so free to mix your own colors. Like, if I want a color to be slightly more orange or a little bit more yellow or a little bit more green, I can just easily make my own colors, and that's one of the things I really love about watercolors. So now I'm just kind of adding the finishing details to Aurora, like adding more shading to her and giving her little blushing on her face and making the crown look shiny and the sword look shiny by adding some more shading to it. I also added some more shading to her hair just to give it a little bit of detail. So here's the finished picture of Aurora from the game Chil of Light. I had so much fun working on this picture and I'm actually kind of proud of it. I feel like it turned out nicely and I really like the illustrative storybook kind of look. And I'm really happy with how the trees turned out and the fog effect. I had so much fun working with watercolors again, and I definitely want to keep working with them more in my sketchbook. Before I end this video, I want to say thank you so much to my patrons, including Rachel, Andrew, Swinky, now from Academy of Games, Lucio, Robert, Tamalam, Pizzatera, Anne, Magic Gamer Dad, Eduardo, AJ, Nikki, Michael, Adam, Narichan, Daniel, Panda Bear, Daniel, Aaron, and Patrick. Thank you so much for being a patron and for your support. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!